Yeah, they actually brought in a new type of petrol about, 10, 15 years ago called Opal petrol. And that was supposed to be non-sniffable.
Right.
But, and this is the part that baffles me, like, because you have to be smart to work this out, but if you're that smart, why are you sniffing petrol? But anyway, someone, and I don't know who, worked out a method of getting it out with styrofoam. You crush up a styrofoam cup, put it in the petrol and let it sit for a while or something like that. I don't know for sure. And that gets rid of the chemical that makes it non-sniffable,
Right.
apparently. So I don't know who worked that out and I don't know who taught the others, but it's now possible to sniff the non-sniffable petrol. So, yeah.
Welcome back to the Unreal Press podcast, the internet's first, and in my tequila drinking opinion, foremost podcast on online culture, transgressive fiction, and everything from 4chan that's actually good. And today we don't just have someone from 4chan, we've got somebody from the land down under, and no, it's not John David Card. Instead, I've got the author of The Last Free Man himself, Lewis Wilston. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome, that's great. And as always, I am Labuschagne. I'm drinking a Jose Cuervo Highball with a couple of bitters, and I gotta say it's probably not a drink I'm gonna be repeating anytime soon. How about yourself? You have anything?
Just a coffee.
Oh yeah, it's
very
like
sober habit.
right. Oh yeah, it's also isn't it like just 10 a.m. your side?
Yeah, 10 a.m. Yeah, so I've had brekkie and here I am.
Yeah, that explains things. It's midnight my side, so yeah, different side of the world.
Of course, yeah.
As always, I mean, let's begin with your book, The Last Free Man. What inspired you to write that? Is it just so different from pretty much everything I've found or 4chan so far?
So how I started writing, I had, I suppose you'd call it sort of like a midlife crisis.
Okay.
I hit the age of 32 and realised that I wasn't really much better off than I'd been at 22, and got a little bit depressed about that.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that's harrowing.
Yeah. So I just sort of spat the dummy with society, I guess, and I had a friend out bush, and I gave up on the city and I went out bush and I went to working on the Nullarbor at a Roadhouse. Should I explain about the Nullarbor for people who may not know?
Yeah, please do.
I should, eh?
Yeah, I found that to be really interesting. I don't know how that you pronounced it like that for starters. I thought it was Nullarbor.
Okay. No, it's Nullarbor. It comes from Latin, nullus arbor, no trees, because there aren't any. So
good name.
It's sort of a big, empty, flat desert plain. It's got really nothing except sort of knee-high salt bush, and it's dead flat. Like you could almost put a spirit level on it.
Huh.
And it goes on. It's hundreds, thousands of Ks. It's huge. And you've got basically just one highway going through it, and about 100 Ks north of that, you've got one railway line, and that's it. There's nothing. And along the highway, sort of about every 120 Ks or so, you've got a roadhouse, obviously, so people can get fuel and things like that.
Right, so like a truck stop, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And because there's no town or anything, the staff have to live on site, so you live in a little cabin at the back of the roadhouse, it's kind of the point of doing the job. Like you're only on minimum wage, same as a petrol station in the city. But because you're getting housed and fed by the boss, you don't spend any money. There's nowhere to spend money. And so you can save a lot of money. And so that's one of the main points of doing the job. And also, if you're just sick of society or you need to hide out, it's perfect for that sort of thing.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, so I went out there, I spat the dummy with society, and I went out there, and honestly, within about 3 months, I was feeling great again. Like just getting out of society just dramatically improved my mental health and everything.
All right.
And while I was out there, I'd always thought about writing, and I thought, I think a lot of people who are big readers sooner or later think about writing a book, and I thought, well, I'm gonna write a book, and I'm just going to do it. Life's too short. I'm just going to do it. I tried writing genre fiction to start with, and I was really terrible at it. Really bad. I wrote
Happens
this
to the
novel
best of
that
us.
was supposed to be. Yeah, I wrote this novel that was supposed to be the first in a big series of 8, but it was Game of Thrones in space. It was terrible. It was really terrible. Sent that off, got rejected inevitably. Tried writing crime fiction, was terrible at that as well. Just I don't have the knack. I have respect for people who do that stuff and make it work, but I just do not have that knack. And I was still reading a lot while I was doing this, and I discovered Somerset Maugham. I don't know if you've read him at all.
I have read of Human
Uh,
Bondage, and I've started but have not actually ever managed to finish The Razor's Edge. Fantastic writer.
okay. Yes, yes. I loved him. I discovered him. I read a couple of his novels and loved them. And then I started reading his short stories, and they are absolutely brilliant. He used to travel around a lot in what was back then the British Empire, and he'd find these people, like on a rubber plantation in colonial Malaya, or a customs house in colonial Hong Kong, or someone who'd become a white man who'd become a beach bum in colonial Samoa, and he'd write about them, and he just had a real eye for people and how they got to their situation. And as I was reading this, I thought this is a bit like here on the Nullarbor, the people that just washed up, and I thought, hey, maybe I could do something like that, and something just click in the brain, and those stories started coming out in that first book there. So that's how it happened.
Ah, well then. That's bloody serendipitous. Okay.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
explains a lot.
Yeah, I guess it does. It just reading a lot and just finding something and finding my topic, my voice, I guess.
Right. Great. Yeah, I think that's actually real damn important for a writer, and I mean, it's something I've struggled with myself, and I don't think I've actually found a consistent voice yet in my own writing, despite, putting out 2 books. But more generally, finding your niche, it's write what you know, and I think so many people say, well, I can be a genre fiction writer because I read genre fiction. But, I mean, you haven't been to space. But what you have been is around people and around situations and acquiring knowledge.
Mm. I think, yeah, genre fiction really does have a knack, and I for whatever reason, I don't have the knack, which is a pity because it probably makes more money. But anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel like I have found my voice now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed reading the short stories is they were consistent. I think that helped a lot with short stories is that you learn a lot more about the world. I mean, assuming they're set in the same world, of course. And about the culture and the sort of lifestyles people lead. And, as somebody who's never been to Oz, that was very helpful for me to actually get into that mindset and seeing, all right, this is the Nullarbor. This is why you don't want to be a bogan in Perth. This is the world. Even if I only spent like 5 minutes with each character at most.
Yeah, yeah, and it was very sort of immediate, those stories. I was writing the life as I was living it. Um and sometimes, I'd meet someone, on a Monday, and I'd sort of talk to them and get a little glimpse of their story, and then, I'd stew that over in my head for a few days, and by Friday or Saturday I'd have a story come out. It was very immediate and of the moment.
Ah, well, that's damn interesting because so it's almost like a diary then. Just you observing something and it's done. There's no real sitting and ruminating on it then.
There was a little bit of stewing on it, and I was writing about a life that I was living. So yeah, it was. I wouldn't say quite like a diary, but there wasn't a lot of looking backwards deep into the past or anything. No, it was that period of my life. I couldn't write those stories now, like, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that does make sense. I'm following. It's like heat of the moment kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I was immersed in that life, and I was writing about it. Yeah,
All right.
using it for real material. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's helpful. I think that's yeah, you definitely then must have made the best out of your time in the Nullarbor Roadhouses because I can imagine that a lot of that stuff would just have been as boring as shit.
Um, everyone says that. I loved it. Like, it was honestly one of the best 5-year periods of my life. Don't tell my wife that, but I just had no responsibility. I just bummed around. And there was always something interesting to me. Maybe because I'm more the sort of person that stands back and observes. I'm not really get in amongst it. What's the word? Introverted, I guess would be the word. So for me, just observing the sort of human traffic coming and going. I used to go for walks out in the desert, and see all the wildlife and things that were out there, and I found it all fascinating. I was never bored in the 5 years I was there. It was
Okay.
great.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I think we must be very different people then, because I'm a hardcore extrovert. Like, I've done holidays like that, and I've done some work out in, I think, what must have been the Kenyan equivalent of, well, not exactly a roadhouse, but the middle dog nowhere, and I did not like that.
I think it does take a type of certain personality type to enjoy it.
Mm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and that was actually brings me to my next question then, Lewis, is would you recommend people go to the Nullarbor then? Like, is it worth it just to drive through that stretch of flat land?
As a life experience, yes, yes. You'll see something. You realise how much empty space is in Australia, and how much we think, especially when you live in a city, you think humanity is all that, is everything, and it's permanent and it's solid. And you go out in a place in the Nullarbor, and there are places where basically no human being has really ever been, probably. And you realise we're not as big a deal as we think we are, human race. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's good to get that sort of perspective, and it's just it is an amazing place. It's a unique experience that I think it's worth having. Yes.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think taking that in is definitely very important. And yeah, just
Mm.
seeing what else is out there, I think, can be so helpful for a lot of people because, like you said, and like you also showed in your novel, you can get so cooped up in the city or even just in a routine, and that you think, that's it, that's the world, this is how everyone lives, and this is all there is. It really just crushes something in the human spirit to get trapped in that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just seeing, and I found that when you see other options in life, it then flows on, and you look at other options, and it just expands the mind a little bit. Well, that was my experience anyway.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an opportunity to grow a hell of a lot as a person.
Mm. Of course, I mean, I was there sort of having a sulk from civilization, essentially, but I it improved my mental health huge amounts. It was amazing. Just as soon as I got away from the city, how much, and just stopped caring about civilization, how much happier I was.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it. You get, or at least for me, you get trapped in that loop of deadline, bill, money to next week, deadline, bill. That's a
Mm.
rough way to live 'cause it's just survival mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of then, what are the other people you found in the Roadhouse? Because no, I mean you've told me already they're based in reality, a lot of them, but I'm still struggling to
Mm.
believe like we got people like the titular last free man Jimmy Healy out just
Mm.
grooving around there.
So it sort of divides between people who are there by choice and there by necessity. Um, you and sometimes there's some overlap too with that, but you get people who are there by necessity. You get a lot of people actually on the run from the law out there because
Right.
you're a long way from the nearest police station, and nobody cares too much, nobody looks too hard. So you get people that don't want to be found. Um, you get people that are just utter fuck ups, and they cannot go back to civilization. A lot of functional alcoholics and things like that.
Yeah, like was it
Um,
Julian, the gay chef you mentioned?
yeah, Justin. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He was based on a real person. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the people that just blew everything in the city and just can't go back. So you get those people there that are there by necessity, and then you get people that choose to be there because they like the freedom, they like they don't enjoy society, they prefer it out there, they like that sort of thing. And there is a bit of overlap sometimes between the two. You also get a never-ending stream of backpackers and things, people like that, tourists. So yeah. But it's a colourful mix. I met some really interesting people out there.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely imagine. That was one thing that impressed me. It's something that's never occurred to me because I've done a lot of traveling myself, but I've always been fortunate enough to when I've had to travel, like basically work from home, be an internet nomad. So I've never really been exposed to like the thought process of, oh yeah, I'm thousands of kilometers away from home. Let me get a job in a gas station. That was one of the most surreal things. It's just learning like people would come from Europe and work in a roadhouse in the Nullarbor.
Well, because of Australia's visa things, if the European backpackers, if they do, I think it's 6 months or 3 months. I think it's 3 months. They can stay an extra year or something. I think that's how it works. So that's the appeal for them. Um, and quite a few of them end up getting marrying Australian men. My wife was a backpacker. Um,
Well done. Well done.
yeah, so that happened. So yeah, but you do get people that just sort of get blown there by the wind. Essentially, there was one woman at Border Village Roadhouse, which is right on the border of South Australia and Western Australia, on the state line there. And the story was that she was on the run from Brisbane. She had been involved with some dodgy bikies and things. And she was driving. She had almost no money. She had to leave in a hurry. Everything she owned in the back of the car, sort of thing.
All right.
Car broke down at Border Village. And they said to her, look, this is going to take weeks to get the parts and whatever. And she's like, I have no money. What am I going to do? And they offered her a job and said, look, stay here and work and while we sort out your car. And 14 years later, she was still there.
Huh.
So things like that
Related to other
happen.
wind. Yeah. Well then. Yeah, it must be such a different world.
Yeah. And I when because I did 5 years all up, and when I did move back to town, I did find it a bit of a rough transition to get back into normal society. But I've more or less managed it, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. You're married with kids now, right?
Yeah. I'm almost a full-fledged normie.
My condolences. So yeah, that really just makes me wonder. Then is like, okay, the whole arc of you don't whack it in the city the first time around. You go to a roadhouse to clear your head, and you have 5 fantastic years in Nullarbor. Then you move back to South
Yeah.
Australia. All right, but how are you on 4chan during all of this? That doesn't make sense for me.
We still had internet out there. It wasn't very good, but it was functional internet.
Huh. Well, I guess that
Yeah.
answers my question.
Yeah, I used to shitpost on pole a lot when I was out there.
That must have been an experience seeing what they're complaining about and just looking outside, looking out the window and just seeing it flat. Wow.
Yes. And they're talking about, this, that, and the other, and this happened in the city. And I was like, well, I went for a walk out in the desert today and saw a snake.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all I've got to offer.
Yeah. It puts things in a real different perspective.
It really does. Yes.
And
I
so
was.
these roadhouses, you say they're almost like little villages.
Yeah. So you've got sort of the roadhouse out front with the petrol and a bit of a shop and a bar and a restaurant, and you've got a little motel, sort of about 2 dozen rooms, pretty basic.
Right.
And then just out the back is the staff quarters, and they've got little cabins, and that's where the staff live. And it's usually about a dozen people or so, and that's it. And then like you stand out the back of the staff quarters, and you can look full 360 degrees, and there's nothing. There's just knee-high saltbush as far as the eye can see, dead flat, absolutely nothing.
Well then, yep, that must be one hell of a surprise.
Yeah, I really started to love it really quickly.
Hmm.
It was amazing. I had a ball. Yeah.
Yeah, it must be so tranquil. And also, you said just the random weirdos that get blown in by the wind there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Just it was sort of because that highway is basically the main east-west highway in Australia. So anyone who wants to go east or west has to go through there, and you just get all sorts of oddballs. People on the run from the law, people on the run from their wives or husbands, or people. There was one bloke who he was wanted. He left. He deserted basically from the Australian Army, and they wanted him. There was notices out for him because he might. I think he might have stolen some weapons or something. I don't know, but he was just he'd flipped.
All right.
One too many tours of Afghanistan, and he flipped. And yeah, and he was just running. I don't know what happened to him eventually, but I met him, and yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that must be pretty fascinating. Yeah, yeah. Another character
Mm.
that stuck out to me was this washed-up rock star. You said like some alt rock guy of the '90s, early 2000s just blew in one day.
Yeah, so I took a liberty with that. So the true bit of that was a guy from a band that was big in Australia in the '90s, and just down the road from Nullarbor Roadhouse, there's a place called Head of the Bight, and it's where whales come in May to October. It's like on the cliffs on the coast, and you get these southern right whales that come into the bay there to breed, and it's a bit of a tourist attraction. And he was driving this bus that was bringing like Chinese tourists to see the whales, and he had a Chinese girlfriend, and she did the talking to him and showing him around, and he drove the bus.
Right.
And when I worked out who he was, and I was like, why are you driving a bus? I paid money to see you back in the '90s. You were huge, well, huge in Australia. And I seen you on TV and everything. And he goes, well, big in Australia is not the same thing as being the Rolling Stones. Oh, okay. I was actually disappointed. I thought once you got famous, you'd never had to work again. But apparently, yeah, he was a bit washed up, but he was okay. So I just took that story and just ran with that. And yeah, you've read the final result.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's a scary thing I think about making it is once you make it, you don't have it made.
No, life still goes on. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's like you're famous at 30. Well, what about the next 50 years?
yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, life does not stop because you have a moment in the sun. You can't hold that moment in the sun forever. And bills still keep coming in. Life keeps going on.
No, I mean, that's like so strange for me because in SA, not sure how aware of the place you are, but for any listeners, let me just correct you. Africa is not just jungles and lions. I mean, there is that, but we've got other stuff too. And I think that like the closest we must have to the Nullarbor would probably be the Great Kahua, which is again just a flat plain and nothing in the
Mm.
about smack dab just northwest center of the country. And I mean, we have roadhouses there, but it's not like this because you're sort of expected to commute. Like they send a taxi to the nearest town or squatter camp or village or whatever, drag over all the employees at the crack of dawn, dump them in the roadhouse, and dump the night shift back at the place, and they just rotate it. Actually, living
Okay.
at the truck stop is that would be unheard of.
All right. Okay. Well, there isn't. See, on the Nullarbor, there really isn't a town or a camp or anything. There's no water, so like, how do you? There's no nothing. That's so where would people live? So you have to live in these little cabins behind the roadhouse. That's all there is. Yeah.
Huh. Right, so, like, what would be the nearest town then? Like Esperance?
Well, I used to measure distance from civilization by distance to the nearest McDonald's.
Huh.
You,
Okay.
does that make sense? Like, because to me, that's you're in modern Western civilization when you see those golden arches, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when you can get
Yeah,
Macca's, you know there is law and order.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So when I was at Majura Roadhouse, we were 730 k's to the nearest McDonald's, which was Kalgoorlie. So yeah, that's the sort of distances we're talking about. Yeah.
Wow, that's one hell of a trip right there. I mean, I keep forgetting how big Oz is because you think it's big, but you don't think it's a continent. But it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. I mean, 730 k's would get you one end of England to the other, probably more.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. I mean, I was up in Dubai for my last holiday, and the entire country, like all 7 Emirates of it, it's not 730 k's long. It's like people they complain. Mostly the
Yeah.
indigenous Emiratis, because I mean expats we sort of get used to anything, but they say, "Oh, gee, man, I have to drive across the country to see my grandmother. It'll take me 2 hours." You just, oh, you of
Yeah, well,
all
each
things.
roadhouse was about 120 k's apart, so it's about an hour from roadhouse to roadhouse. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Another thing I want to know is just what do you do if you get stuck? Like your car breaks down in between roadhouses. Do you just die?
you wait for someone to pick you up. If you wander from your vehicle, yes, you will die. Dehydration will kill you really quickly in summer, and there's snakes and scorpions and dingoes. So no, you don't leave your vehicle. Um, Generally, you just wait for someone to pick you up. Each roadhouse usually has some sort of very basic workshop out the back. They can more or less fix most things, so they can come and pick you up and take you back to the roadhouse and proceed from there. But yeah, you'd want to make sure your car's in good condition before you attempt to drive across the Nullarbor.
Right. So I remember, like one of the stories, you hit camel on the road, or
Yes,
the
yes,
character had hit a
yes,
camel.
yes.
Is that really something that happens?
They're,
'Cause like
they're,
here in
oh yeah,
Canada, people hit the moose and the car crumples, but camels.
yeah. So Australia has feral camels. They were brought over before the railways by they had Afghan camel drivers, and they used to do these big camel trains to the little outback settlements.
Right.
And then when the railways were built, they were redundant, and unfortunately, a lot of them were just left to go wild in the bush. And so now we have about 1 million of the bastards, so probably slightly more, roaming around the desert, and they cause a lot of damage to the ecosystem. They're really a pest. And down in the Nullarbor and up in the Northern Territory, they sometimes get on the highway, and I have seen some absolutely horrific smashes. I saw one really bad fatality. A relatively small car hit a camel, took out the legs, and basically a ton of camel came through the windscreen. So you can imagine what that looked like.
Yep. That's a mess.
Um, yeah, it's bad. And because most people are reasonably sensible, you don't drive after dark on the Nullarbor or
Right.
really in the bush in Australia at all, because the kangaroos and things come out. And on the Nullarbor, the worst thing is the big camels and even trucks, like the big road trains. Even them, you hit a camel in that, and you aren't going anywhere. Like it's done. You know, it's a ton. Basically, a camel is about a ton of meat, and it's pretty solid.
Right. Yeah. And I've ridden the guys, and I know you get big horses like a workhorse, but I mean even a small camel is that's a big horse right there, and it's those guys have got staying power too.
Oh yeah. Sometimes the camel will walk away from the crash. Your car's written off, and the camel walks away.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're big. They're big beasts, and yeah, if you hit one in a car, you're not going any further.
Yeah. Right. And so these like one hump camels or two hump camels?
One humps.
Right, dromedaries. Okay. Now I was wondering because you said Afghan cameleers, and I just thought, you don't get the two hump Bactrian camels in Afghanistan, so that just threw me for a second there.
No, I think these are the standard one humps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're trying to. They occasionally do culls and things, or they were trying to ship them over live to Arabia for meat or whatever. But there's just so many in such a big area.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to eradicate them. Yeah.
Huh. All right. And so you say you get a similar problem with kangaroos that they got on the roads and smash.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's usually after dark. As soon as it gets dark, you got to get off the road before dark. Is the tip.
Right.
And if you hit a big red kangaroo, which is the ones we get on the Nullarbor, again you're looking at that's a big weight. That's a big lump of meat. And the worst thing is too, if you get one in the windscreen, and it's still alive, they panic and start kicking around. And a kangaroo's kick, a big kangaroo will open you up. It'll disembowel you, like it'll kill you easily. So it's just it's a bit dangerous driving after dark in the Nullarbor.
Right. I'll keep that in mind then.
If you ever, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like in SA, obviously, we say, don't drive around certain places after dark, but that's because of hijackers. It's not because we get kangaroos or camels on the roads. Like even in the sticks, like the chances of wildlife, big wildlife too, like coyote or something, actually getting on the highway is pretty much zip.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of we do have like obviously we have game farms and national parks. The Kruger is one of the more famous ones, but a lot of it's fenced off or it's fenced around the roads, so you can drive the highways
Uh,
around them basically.
so you wouldn't ever like come across a lion on the middle of the road or something, and no,
Nah,
probably for the best.
yeah, it's like I've seen lions up close. I mean, I've been scratched by a lion, left a couple of scars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was messing around. I sort of brought that one upon myself. But yeah, it's like unless you go out looking for lions and you know a guy, you're not going to get face to face with one. Like maybe if you're out camping on a farm or something, you got raw meat lying around. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we do have to, if you're a farmer, you ride off a couple of head of cattle to the lions every year, but it's not a
Yeah.
common
Yeah.
garden
Of
thing.
course. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like nobody, you know, gets towed in back to town and says bloody lions on the fucking road. Nobody says that. Yeah, but speaking of, another thing that I was just interested in is Alice, because at the back of
Alice
this book
Springs. Yes.
it says you're living in Alice. How the hell do you get to Alice?
Yes. I've since moved.
And as far as I can tell from the book, it just sounds like a place that's not worth living in.
No, it is a shithole. Yes. So the Northern Territory is like Australia's dysfunctional trailer park. Uh, it's an absolute shithole. But there's a lot of money up there. You've got most of the Australian Defence Force is up there. You've got a lot of mining, and you've got the whole Indigenous welfare social work thing going on as well. So there's a lot of government money and corporate money getting pumped up there, but no one wants to live up there because it's a shithole. So if you're a single man like I was at the time, it's a great place to go and work and earn money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Like you
Yeah,
don't have to worry about your family.
but you want to get out. You want to get out before you get married and have kids. But if you're a single bloke, it's great to live and work up there and stash cash, basically. I lived there twice, actually. I was living there a bit over 10 years ago. I worked at the prison there and then came back to South Australia and then went up there again and had a really good job with the local council. It's absolutely an awful place, but you can make a lot of money up there, and that's basically the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That makes sense. That checks out. Yeah, it's like in the
It,
expat community, especially with Saffers. Like the people that want to escape go to Australia or New Zealand. People that want to make money
mm,
go to the Gulf.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's a
yeah. I
little bit
mean, sometimes it's just like that. You got to, if you want to make money, you got to go to a shithole.
yeah, yeah, but,
Tough luck. Yeah.
yeah. Problem is a lot of the Gulf's a shithole, except Dubai because I have to go back to Dubai, so I'm not allowed to make them angry. But a lot of it's just a shithole because one, it's hot as hell. Two, beer is illegal, and three, yes, you get paid with like the best currencies on the planet. The problem is you also have to
Yeah.
spend money in the best currencies on the planet,
Yes.
and there's bugger all to do there. It's like at least
Yeah.
in like Dubai or Kuwait or Qatar, there's people, there's stuff going on. But like if you're in Saudi, you just sit in your compound your entire life. You meet
The
people.
Northern Territory is a bit like that, except alcoholism and violence is just rampant. And but I mean, if you're a single bloke and you want to earn, that's where you go. Yeah.
Well, if I ever piss off my girlfriend that badly, I think you'll see me in Alice. Probably.
Not me. I don't live there anymore. I'm down in Port Lincoln. I've escaped.
I'll pay you a visit and drive across the Nullarbor while I'm at it.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, so one rumor I've heard here. Do people in Alice
Hmm.
sniff petrol?
Ah, yeah. Yes. Okay. So the sniffing petrol thing is a big thing in the Northern Territory amongst the Indigenous people. Yes.
All right. Oh, I mean, to each their own.
Yeah. They actually brought in a new type of petrol about, I know, 10, 15 years ago called opal petrol. And that was supposed to be non-sniffable.
Right.
But, but, and this is the part that baffles me, like, because you have to be smart to work this out. But if you're that smart, why are you sniffing petrol? But anyway,
Yeah.
someone, and I don't know who, worked out a method of getting it out with styrofoam. You crush up a styrofoam cup, put it in the petrol and let it sit for a while or something like that. I don't know for sure. And that gets rid of the chemical that makes it non-sniffable,
Right.
apparently. So I don't know who worked that out, and I don't know who taught the others, but it's now possible to sniff the non-sniffable petrol. So yeah, it's just awful.
Well, that sounds like from bad to worse situation. I mean, I've sniffed a lot of stuff, some of which I will not admit in case my grandmother ever follows through on her promise to watch the Unreal Press podcast in its first, and etc. etc. But yeah, it doesn't sound like a fun time.
Well, there really isn't much to do in the Northern Territory except get off your head and punch on with someone. That's basically your entertainment options up there.
Uh, Cripes, that just sounds like Pretoria, but worse.
It probably is.
I mean,
It's funny story on that.
yeah,
My daughter was born in Alice Springs, and we actually had the only white baby in the maternity ward of Alice Springs Hospital.
huh,
Um, yeah, she was also by far the healthiest. There were kids born with like their mothers drank while they were pregnant and sniffed petrol while they were pregnant, and you just look at the and just go, oh, it was just grim. Uh, but that's the Northern Territory for you. Yeah.
yeah, we got shitholes down here too. One of Yeah, one of the most common things to do, because I live in one of the capital cities of SA, Pretoria, which where the union buildings are. And so, like, it's not a place that's actually worth living unless you have a good reason to be here. I mean, it's not harrowing and unpleasant. It's just you're right next door to Johannesburg, which is just an objectively nicer place.
Ah.
Yeah, and so one thing we always do is take the piss out of every town nearby. So we'd always joke that our version of the Northern Territory, not in those words, but it's not like some place filled with actual crushing poverty and fetal alcohol syndrome, petrol sniffing syndrome. It's Benoni, which is the neighboring town. It's just a smaller, shittier version of Pretoria. You've got a church and a liquor store on every corner, and everyone there has a mullet.
I wonder if you could chart it on a graph, like the amount of mullets amongst the population and the poverty and general hopelessness of the place, because I've seen that in Australia. All the shit parts of Australia have a lot of mullets.
Yeah.
There's something in that.
The
Someone
place
should do a study.
my theory on it is the place that starts going down the tubes, and two things happen. If you're in a small, shitty place in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to be gay. And what are all the hairdressers? They're gay.
Okay.
So it follows that the minute the standard of living drops, all the barbershops close down, and everyone is forced to grow mullets.
Yes. Someone should do like a scientific study and get a scientific name for this. The mullet poverty syndrome or something like that. Like it's a thing. It's a real thing.
Yep. Yeah. I buy it. I put my name on this. my pen name at least.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
The thing that stuck out to me with this book is Shiraz. Like all your, alcoholics, they drink Shiraz.
Yes. Okay. We have a huge wine producing industry in Australia, like the Barossa Valley, Clear Valley, all this sort of thing, and it just kind of went overboard over the last few decades. Farms that did produce other things all got on the bandwagon, started planting grapevines,
Right.
and there's just a massive glut. And it actually got worse because we were exporting a lot of it to China, and then China's got the shits with us for various reasons
Yeah.
and blocked all our wine. And so, yeah, there's just this glut of wine, and it's relatively cheap and cheerful and strong. So, yeah, a lot of the drunks and hardcore alcoholics in this country drink actually fairly good quality Shiraz and whatnot, and Rieslings and various things like that.
Well, that's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cheap and cheerful and strong. Yeah.
Oh, and
So,
what more do you need in
and
alcohol?
widely available.
Yep. Yeah, no, that just reminds me of one thing that actually happened to me this weekend is I'm not sure if you have the Portuguese in Australia, but in SA, for some reason, like the third most common group of white people, apart from the Afrikaans and the British colonials, are the Portuguese. Like half of them own corner stores, like little groceries, and
Okay.
you
Yeah.
can buy pretty much fucking anything there, including wine, because you
Yeah.
can buy wine in a grocery store here. You can't buy beer, but you can buy wine.
Yeah.
And I was there with my grandfather, just bumming around, and you see a bottle of our version of basically mid-grade Shiraz, Tassins.
Yeah.
Tassis, or the
Yeah.
full name Tassenberg, is actually a very good red blend. It's like, unironically, the best alcohol for its price because it costs about 40 rand. Not sure how much that is in Australian dollars, but in American dollars, that's about $3.50 full bottle.
Okay. Yeah. So it'd be about 6 Australian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's aggressively cheap.
Cheap and cheerful.
Yeah. And so I was just saying, Tassis, Opa, Tassis and Tab. And he says, yes. Just across a generational divide, student alcoholics recognize each other and said, I have had terrible experiences after drinking this.
The one when I was a teenager, if you were sort of alternative and grungy and gothy and whatever, that sort of tribe, wearing black t-shirts and all that shit, and Doc Martens. In the thing was black sambuca to drink that, and I
Oh,
can't even look at it.
good
I
God.
can't even smell it now.
I've drank one bottle of that in my lifetime and I've questioned my life choices ever since. Even the
And the really cool thing to do
yeah,
back then was to keep the bottle and carve little holes in it and make a bong out of the bottle. So you know what a sambuca bottle looks like, yeah, the big tall thing.
yep.
Yeah, so to make every dodgy share house I lived in when I was young had a sambuca bottle bong. Yeah,
Well, that's something. Yeah, I mean,
that's classy.
yeah, it's like almost slightly before my time, I'd gone right in the tail end of it. We also used to do Sambuca, and what we did with it was we realized it was flammable, or at least the knockoff Sambuca we got here was flammable.
Yeah,
You could obviously light on fire and do shots of this. And so, several drinking games, one of which we called the Flaming Lamborghini, and nobody can agree on how you do it. But the only point of
I've heard of it.
consensus
Yeah,
was that you take the shot once you're drunk it and you put it on your head like a little hat.
yes.
And across several generations, like some mythical creature, there is the man called a unicorn. Because he'd left his flaming shot too long and it got hot. And alcohol burns quite warm for human skin. And in a shot glass, it's not going to melt either. It's just going to sit there and burn. And so, he goes off, he has a leak, he drinks his flaming shot alcohol, and it makes him feel lacquered. And then he puts the shot glass on his head, and it doesn't come off. So occasionally you'll see like an old uncle wandering around here with just this little ring on his forehead.
Yeah, badge of a misspent youth.
Yeah, it's a badge of pride. Well, around the right crowd. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting place, right? And yeah, and so I'm told you've written a second book too, actually, Lewis.
Yes, it's called Remembering the Dead and Other Stories. And yeah, it got released back in January.
All right, and is that one also then a short story collection about your experiences?
Yeah, I guess it's more of a backwards looking book. Oh, can I tell this story?
Go ahead.
So when a little bit after my daughter was born, I had a weird experience of I was actually fucking happy, and I didn't know how to deal with that. Like, what the fuck, you know? Everything was working. A lot of good things were happening in my life, and over a period of about 3 years, I had a real good run, and I was like, what the fuck? Yeah.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, I just like, why? Why is everything? Why am I happy? Why is everything going well?
Like, is someone planning a
And
joke on me? Is there a camera?
yeah, yeah, essentially. And I started thinking about sort of some of the grim times in my life, and I was remembering one particular period of my life when I lived in Fremantle and was recovering from the poor choices of my youth. And I thought about some of the people I knew back then, and it occurred to me to Google them and see if I could find them. And I was expecting, oh, they'll be on some form of social media, or maybe they made the local paper for something, and maybe, something like that. And I Googled one particular name, and this first thing that came up was this fella's grave. And I was like, oh, I have to tell these people stories. So that's how the second book started. I started writing about these people that I had known and were now dead. And it just proceeded from there, really.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I'll definitely have to check it out
Mm.
because I enjoyed the first one.
Oh,
Unfortunately,
thank you.
enjoyable because little bearing on if I have to read it for the podcast or not. But actually, I went through it. I was just stuck around and I was actually waiting for this ridiculous convention to start. My girlfriend has a interesting taste, to say the least, and said, we have to go to this thing. I'll spare you the details because a man has shame. And
Was it a furry convention? Did you go to a furry convention?
no, mostly because SA does not have furry conventions, at least Pretoria doesn't.
Yet. Yet.
Yes, and she is a furry, but that's beside the point. So I was having a
Okay.
10 a.m. beer in a steakhouse, paging through this, and I thought, oh, gee, I'd really rather be with Jimmy Healy hunting the last wild horse in the outback right now, and not biding my time until I can pay an overpriced ticket to like a fetish gear for the next 3 hours.
Well, yeah, I'm glad it gave you a bit of a distraction.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'll definitely check out Remembering for the Dead about, as you said, more domestic stuff. And so,
Yeah,
do you have any other
yeah.
projects aimed after that?
I've got another folder of short stories. So I'm trying to talk my publisher into taking a look at them, but he's kind of busy at the moment with his other projects.
All right.
But I'm hoping that we could get that out maybe next year. So, yeah. And then once that's done, I want to sit down and write a novel, a big one. So
Cool.
that's roughly the plan.
All right. Oh, looking forward to that. Sounds great.
Mm.
So, closing thoughts on this. Do you have any, advice or recommendations to just, slash lit in general? Like anything you've picked up, writing and actually being published and, in fact, shortlisted for an award. Just have anything to say
Mm.
about that?
I guess find your own particular voice. I think that's what's really worked for me. Is my thing, and that's my particular voice, and it's fairly distinct. Um, I when I was starting to write those stories in the first book, because you question yourself and go, is this really original? And I actually Googled and tried to find any fiction published about the Nullarbor,
Right.
and I couldn't find a thing. I couldn't find anything. It's possible there is something out there but according to Google, I'm the first. So it's always a good thing, I think, to find your own little voice, your own little niche, and ignore the trends, ignore what's popular, ignore all that stuff. Just find your voice. That's probably the best advice I can give. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just saying, it sounds interesting. It's also something that I haven't heard as stressed as much, because a lot of people will say, somewhat autistically, here is my 100% guaranteed solution for success. This is often from some anon who, as far as I know, is either some world famous billionaire author shitposting, or in the real world, some idiot who hasn't accomplished anything. Or, they'll say,
Money you can make money.
but actually to say, be yourself. I think it helps, especially in, the somewhat unfortunately elitist board that this podcast grew out of, much to my eternal chagrin.
Because like I say, I tried writing genre fiction, and not only was I terrible at it, it was pretty derivative. That sci-fi novel I wrote was basically Game of Thrones in space, and I'm glad that it will never see the light of day. I have this haunting fear that if I ever really do get famous, someone will dig that up, and I'll be, oh my god.
Yeah, well, at least you'll be famous. You'll have your 30 minutes in the sun, and guess then you'll have to drive bus tours around the Nullarbor again.
Yes, yes. Although, I still think if I went to Netflix with that idea and said, look, here's the show. It's a bit of pew-pew spaceship action, bit of political intrigue, and at least one set of quality tits per episode. They'd be like, you're a genius, here's $1 million.
Yeah, I could go for one set of quality tips per episode, more even.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's probably the best advice I can give, really, is just find your particular voice, find your niche, ignore the trends, ignore what's currently popular. I don't have better advice than that, I don't think.
Solid advice enough. I think another piece of advice you've definitely given me is, if things ever go that far south, there's a Roadhouse with your name on it.
They always need staff. They can't get bodies. No one wants to be out there, or very few people want to be out there.
Well, perhaps once I'm done with the post-grad, I'll have to give it a shot. So wondering where I go, And currently I was looking at European Georgia, and my interest has waned with Ukraine's progress in the war, to say the least. So, yeah, I feel I definitely have to check out Oz.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely thanks for coming on, Lewis. It's been great having you here, and it's definitely been interesting to hear your perspective on things and see the kind of life you've lived and how it's made The Last Free Man into the short story collection it is.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, more than welcome. So yeah, until next time, I've been Labuschagne. This has been the Unreal Press podcast. We've had Lewis Wilston on. He's a guy. And yeah, until next time. If things go horrifically, catastrophically wrong, like the Nullarbor will always be there. Cheers.
It will. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I may have gone too far in a few places.